Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you to those of you who are tuning in live. If you're watching the recording, thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time to learn a little bit about how to stay emotionally well in the digital age. The month of May is slowly coming to a close. As you probably know by now, the month of May has been declared to be the Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we've had a lot of just really wonderful, really exciting events that we've been celebrating throughout the month. Earlier in the month, we had Digital Wellness Day, which happened to be on the same day as Children's Mental Health Day. May 20th was Mental Health Action Day, when a bunch of different organizations like MTV, 6 Seconds, the EQ Network, and many, many others came together to really try and empower people to take an active step towards really understanding what mental health is, and really taking the necessary measures and implementing the right kind of practices in order to increase their mental health. And one of the things that I've found to kind of really resonate with me when we talk about mental health is that oftentimes I find that when we're talking about mental health, inevitably, very quickly, we tend to kind of veer off and start talking about mental illness, which is incredibly important. And we need to be talking about that as well. It's an incredibly important topic for people to be able to detect when they're not doing that well in terms of their mental illness. But what I want to make sure to do also is really address mental health specifically and just make it easier for people to kind of understand and sense and feel what it's like to have emotional, mental, psychological well-being in your life on a day-to-day basis, as much as that's possible. Of course, we've all been through a very, very difficult period and are not really out of that period yet. So one of the most important things I think when we talk about both mental health and mental illness is to be very kind with ourselves, and to realize that it really has been a struggle for a very long time. And then if we're not doing that well, that's perfectly fine, and it's perfectly normal. The most normal way to be right now is to not be too well. But of course, for those of you who don't know me, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Theodora Popkovic. I'm a psychologist, a parenting coach, and a digital wellness consultant. Hence, this combination of the emotional wellness, emotional intelligence topic with the topic of digital wellness and what it means really to be well, both emotionally and mentally in the digital age. And I find this to be an incredibly important topic to talk about. I don't really think that we can address kind of well-being as a whole until we really address well-being in the digital wellness space. And what that looks like in our digital life. And so that was really the kind of the inspiration behind going live. Right now, this is one last time that I will be going live in the month of May, talking about some of these topics. Of course, if you follow me on social media, if you visit my website, topcoaching.com, you'll be able to find a lot of information about all of these topics, and find a lot of different resources that you can tap into as well, kind of on your journey to better mental and digital well-being as well. And so what I thought I would do as I jump on live today is really share some of my practices, some kind of the most recent, the most kind of fresh list of practices that I think can really make a huge and incredibly significant difference when it comes to being emotionally well in the digital age. I've been in this space for a few years now. I've spent a lot of time talking about this topic with adults, with children, with parents, with non-parents, with nonprofits, with large organizations, small organizations. And as I myself am learning about what it really means to relate to technology in the way that we do, I'm always looking to kind of gather more resources and to try and make this kind of weird, sometimes abstract, sort of nebulous relationship that we have with technology a lot more concrete, and try and bring it down into some really, really practical steps that we can all take in order to improve our relationship with technology. And I very specifically said in all of my social media posts about this event that if you are a teenager, I really welcome you to watch this. If you are the parent of a teenager, to please invite them to watch this as well. Godparent, guardian, if you have nieces and nephews. I think this is a really important topic for us to talk to teenagers about, because a lot of times when we're talking about how we relate to technology, we're talking about children all the way from 1 up to 21. But what I often find is that we're either talking about them while they're not in the room, or we're kind of talking at them. And so there are a number of different really wonderful organizations that are now starting to empower youth voices and to really get them to speak up about what their own experience is in the digital world, and what they feel is lacking when it comes to our participation in their digital world, and when it comes to the resources that they really need to have in order to be able to be responsible digital citizens, and also to really kind of take care of their mental health as they're interacting with these different technologies, and with the people who are on the other side of these as well. So I want to share with you kind of over the next 20 or so minutes the kind of most recent list of what I think are really 5 of the most important key practices to really maintaining our emotional well-being in the digital age. And I will have a few links and resources that I want to share with you kind of as we go along as well. So the first one is feed your soul and your algorithms. And I like to use food as kind of as a metaphor for how we consume technology. And this is a really great approach to do with young kids, a great way to talk about this with adults as well. What I mean by this is, we do often talk about what we need for mental health in terms of the self-care practices that we need. And a lot of them really have to do with kind of feeding ourselves with more healthy, more wholesome, let's say emotional experiences, really feeding our soul, doing a lot of mindfulness work, a lot of introspection, making sure that we relate to people in healthier ways, and surround ourselves with much kind of healthier relationships. I think we need to do absolutely the same thing online as well. And part of this was really inspired by a recent article that I'm going to share with you in the comment section, that was written by a colleague, a thought influencer, really important person in this space of digital wellness and responsible technology, called David Ryan Polgar. He's a tech ethicist. And he wrote a recent article about algorithmic curation, and the fact that as we all interact with these different platforms online, there's a huge mechanism behind that is taking in all of the information that we're sharing, and is basically making kind of guesses and assumptions as to what we might like to see next. And that's called algorithmic curation. It's quite a mouthful. And I'm going to use the definition that David shares in the article to kind of help you understand what that really is. So through the use of an algorithm that makes predictions based on past user behavior, the platform recommends certain content. This process is not without drawbacks, however, as the platform assumes control of shaping the user's experience with the site and media diet. And there's another really important piece of research that David shares in this article from January 2012, which showed that, or data scientists at Facebook showed how curation decisions for its newsfeed could actually alter the happiness level of its users. Meaning that depending on what you see on your feed, we're live streaming here on Facebook and on YouTube, it's true of both platforms, your mood will be very, very different depending on the kind of information that you're exposed to. And of course, speaking of YouTube, what some people perhaps don't realize is that about 70% of the videos that people watch on YouTube are actually the result of what the recommendation algorithm shows us. And so you know that on the right hand side, there's a whole list of recommended videos that you're probably going to get after watching this video as well. And so even by watching me speak today and having clicked on this video, that's another little piece of information that the platform has collected that will be put through the process of algorithmic curation. And based on that, there's going to be a decision made, not your decision, of what is going to be shown to you next, what piece of content is going to be shown to you. So when I talk about feeding your soul and feeding your algorithm, what I mean is that we actually have a lot more power than we realize when it comes to navigating a lot of this content, and when it comes to the types of content that we see as well. And we don't usually realize that. So there's a huge amount of data being sucked in from the behavior that we exhibit online. And based on that behavior, we get a kind of a different input in terms of the places that we visit online. So being a lot more mindful in terms of the information that you share with, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, whether it's in the Google search bar, wherever you are, but being more mindful of that information will be a really significant payback for you, in the sense that the information that you're being shown afterwards will be drastically different depending on your different behavior, and depending on what are the types of links that you click on, the types of videos you click on, and so on. So given that our mood can be so seriously impacted by what we see on all of these different platforms, I really urge you to think about the types of videos, the types of links, the types of profiles, the types of articles that you click on, that you like, that you share. Because the kind of the information that you get back from the platform will be significantly different. And I think this is a really important point, because I think it's a hugely kind of empowering idea as well, that I find a lot of people don't actually realize. So while, you know, documentaries like The Social Dilemma show us just how little effect we can have, and kind of how overwhelming this whole kind of wizard behind the curtain is, and the whole mechanism is, there's still a great amount that we can actually do. And really choosing the kind of the data that you feed to the algorithm is definitely one of these. The second one is in line with the first one that I shared with you. And I use this hashtag that was actually used by a really wonderful nonprofit organization called the Female Lead. They use this hashtag, Disrupt Your Feed, a little while ago to really help teenage girls in particular make better decisions around the types of people with whom they connect online. And so this is another link that that I want to share with you, so you can find out a little bit more about what they did here, because it was a really, really wonderful initiative that was done jointly with a host of psychologists who really helped conduct this research and follow these teenage girls for a couple of weeks in order to see how their experience was different. The platform that they were addressing specifically in this case was Instagram. And basically what they had these girls do was think about the kinds of professions that they're interested in taking part in one day when, you know, when they grow up. To think about the kinds of interests that they have, whether it's science, whether it's art, performance, you know, law, fashion, you know, whatever it might be, and to really choose very intentionally, very consciously, very specifically the kinds of women who are quite well known and who are quite prominent, who are quite successful in these different fields, quite inspirational figures, and to follow them for a couple of weeks. And then the researchers went back and they interviewed these girls at the end to see what their experience was. And the findings they reported were absolutely fascinating. One of the kind of main comments that stuck with me was that a lot of these girls said that they didn't actually realize that you could use social media and Instagram specifically for this kind of purpose. They thought it was all about kind of taking selfies, looking at other people's selfies, purchasing things, so a lot of kind of consumer behaviors, and really just kind of following, a bunch of different influencers online. They didn't realize that they could also find these kinds of really inspirational, really kind of prominent, impactful individuals online. And so their whole experience of social media was completely altered over a very, very short period of time. It was only a couple of weeks. It was a very short study. So with this, the second point and this idea of disrupting your feed, I again want to empower you to make choices, because again, I think we end up feeling very overwhelmed by what goes on online. And we don't realize that, again, we can actually impact not only the algorithms, as I discussed in my first point, but we can also kind of change who we see online, really in the same way that we make decisions around that. Kind of in the real world, we make conscious decisions around the kind of people we're going to surround ourselves with, the kinds of friendships that we're going to establish, that we're going to maintain. I encourage you to think about your kind of your online community in exactly the same way, and to make really conscious decisions around who you want to follow, whose content you want to like, whose content you want to read, whose content you want to share, you want to engage with. And I encourage you to do that as soon as you kind of walk away from this video, to have a look at whatever platforms are the ones that you use more frequently, and just go through your list of people whom you follow, and have a think about, how many of these people do you really enjoy interacting with, and how many of these people you feel you can actually contribute to in a positive way, and how many of them contribute to you as well. And the ones who you perhaps don't feel that way about, just kind of let go of them. I think terms like unfollow or block sound a little bit painful. Social rejection is always painful to human beings. So think about it more in terms of a letting go. And again, you will find within only about a week or two that, again, the way your digital space, the one that you occupy every single day, looks, will be very different. So by doing that, by really choosing new people to follow, and kind of old people to let go of, you will be disrupting your feed, and you will completely change your digital environment. So the third one, I mentioned this term in the real world, versus in the virtual world. That's what IVL stands for. It may not be a well-known kind of short term for this, but perhaps I just made it up. What's interesting when we talk to younger people, and this is why I always encourage teenagers, young adults, even middle schoolers sometimes, to engage in these kinds of conversations, is that their language around the digital space and the real space is very different. So you'll usually find that kind of the millennial generation and older will use terms like in real life, whereas for a lot of younger people, this distinction is really not that clear. The difference between in the real world versus the digital world or the virtual world. For them, the two kind of come together in a very, very powerful way, to the point where perhaps they can't quite make the distinction between the two. And I'm a huge proponent of teasing apart kind of the threads of the virtual and the real. There's only so much of that we can do in reality, especially over the past year, given we've spent so much time online. But I think there are a number of really important reasons that I'm going to share with you now, that make this a really, really important key practice for us to implement. One of the kind of the main basic reasons why really is that everything that we see online is placed there very, very intentionally, right? It's placed there with a purpose. It's definitely been premeditated. A really well-known term for that is curated, right? We're all in one way or another curating the content that we share with others. I very intentionally wore my little mental health awareness ribbon today, because I want to send a certain message with this presentation that I'm sharing with everyone. I also made sure that my frame looks a certain way, that the lighting looks a certain way, and so on, right? And I'm by no means in any way possible an influencer. So this is the kind of very minimal kind of curation that we do when we kind of enter the digital world. And then, of course, when you look at brands, when you look at the marketing world, when you look at influencers, especially with kind of significant numbers of followers, their content is curated, and it's not always done in kind of the most obvious ways, such as, you know, putting makeup on or kind of staging their background. It's in a lot of different ways. And there was a statistic a few years ago, I think perhaps even as many as 5 years ago, that said that for every one photo that young people posted, they would take about 25, you know, in order to just get that one little photo that was kind of just right. And even then, they would spend a very, very kind of a very, very large, significant amount of time editing all of these photos and kind of augmenting them and so on. And there was another study that looked at the age group of, it looked at women, the age group of 16 to 25. And it actually showed that this segment of the population, the one that they did the study with, was spending about 5 hours every single day taking selfies. Right? So a huge amount of time that is spent really intentionally sending a certain kind of message across to the other people in the virtual space. And there was another really interesting piece of research that I wanted to share with you as well that I just very recently came across. And it was a study that was done in conjunction. It was done by the University of Swansea in Wales in the UK, done in conjunction with an Italian university, where they showed there's a very interesting kind of two-way relationship between the use of visual-based social media. So, you know, things like Instagram, things like Facebook as well, and the trait of narcissism or narcissistic personality traits. And so what they found was that when you look at people who tend to use a lot of visual-based social media, they tend to have kind of slightly higher levels of narcissistic traits, but they also found the reverse to be true. So that if you take a kind of random population of people and you encourage them to use more of these visually based social media platforms, this tends to increase narcissistic personality traits in these people, right? So this is a really, really interesting kind of interaction of these different behaviors and kind of personality traits, one that I find incredibly interesting. And it's one of the reasons why I think we need to be very mindful of the fact that there is a difference between what we see online, that there, I think, always needs to be a little voice inside of our head that reminds us of the fact that there was an intention behind this post. Sometimes it's a great intention, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But it's an important practice to engage in because a lot of the times the intentions aren't entirely clear. And sometimes they may try to influence us one way or another. And when we're talking about digital citizenship, especially for younger people, and if you're the parent of a young child who is perhaps just starting to engage with the digital world, this is an incredibly important component of them being able to distinguish real news versus fake news, a real person versus a kind of augmented person, and so on. There's so many more distinctions. And speaking of kind of augmented, the experience that I had recently that inspired me to include this as one of the key practices was an article that I came across in which I came across a phrase or an abbreviation that I'd never heard of. And the abbreviation is VBO. And I would ask you as well if you would like to share this with the comments, or if you'd like to get in touch with me afterwards via email. I would love to know what your experience is with this concept, and if you've ever had an experience of it before, or if this is brand new for you as well. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out what VBO actually means. And it turns out that and I apologize for laughing because I actually think this is very serious, but there's a level of absurdity in this that's very difficult to hide. It's a short term for visible belly online. VBO, visible belly online. And there were so many ways in which, like I said, I was absolutely shocked by reading this term, because the thing that little voice inside of my head immediately said is, that's just not a thing. That's not a real thing. That is something that has been invented as a result of social media, visual based social media, on which we take so many pictures of so many um, parts of not just our bodies but our lives, and the way in which we then nitpick these photos and our poses and what we're wearing and what our body shape is has led to terms like these really being invented out of absolutely nothing. There was another term that I also came across that I don't know if you're familiar with. The shorthand for it is FUPA. Another one that I found to be absolutely obnoxious, probably even more so than BBO. FUPA stands for fatty upper pubic area. So there you go. You'll learn something new in case you were not aware of this one before. But to me, these terms, and there's probably so many others that I'm not aware of, are a great example of how something that is not a thing becomes a thing once it's given a name, once it's given that extra attention, and really once it's kind of scrutinized to absolute no end on social media. So difference between in real life versus in virtual life. A little voice inside of our head reminding us and kind of being that it's almost like a version of a quality control, but a kind of a control of what's really relevant and what's not, and what's real and what's not, what's been fabricated, what hasn't, what is augmented, what isn't, what's fake, what's isn't. For children in particular, and their ability to navigate the digital world and maintain their emotional well-being, I think this is perhaps the most important practice, the absolutely key practice for the younger generation that is coming up into this digital space. The fourth key point is, again, one leads on from the other, is very much connected to this idea of comparisons, which I think is how we, in part, come up with these kind of absurd ideas around, by the way, for the most part, women's bodies. And what's right with them, what's wrong with them. But the importance of, again, staying in touch with two things, with truth and with a sense of balance. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about social comparisons and social comparisons online. Whether they're good, they're bad, are they harmful, are they helpful? Social comparisons in themselves, and I'm saying this as a psychologist, are not really an issue of whether they're healthy or not healthy. They're simply human. They are part of one of our kind of deepest thought and behavioral tendencies and patterns. Our brains are wired to compare ourselves with other people because we do have that kind of herd mentality. We are one of these creatures that tend to stay together and that seek out safety by being together in a group, in a pack, in a tribe. Right. So making a social comparison is really a survival mechanism in its very, very basic form. We're always looking at other people and we're kind of measuring out how we stack up in comparison to them. And then in order to fit in, to belong, to seek out that safety in the group, we will kind of adjust ourselves and we will measure our behavior, how we speak, how we relate to others, and we'll adjust that so that we're kind of more able to fit in with the group. And like I said, that has a really important kind of survival function. It's key. With media in general, not just social media, but all forms of media, kind of unfolding in the way that it has and becoming what it is right now, social comparisons has kind of, they've skyrocketed, in the ways in which we compare ourselves to each other has really kind of shot up and out into the stratosphere. We do it in ways that are both healthy for us and ways that are not healthy for us. And that's why I think that the idea of balancing out what we share online and again, the kind of content that we consume online is incredibly important. And for this fourth one, I was inspired to include it in this list after I posted something, or actually I read a post by somebody else on LinkedIn. This was about a week ago, that really moved me, and that I then decided to share with with other people on my LinkedIn profile. And so far it's gotten about 8,000 views or something like that. And like I said before, I'm no influencer, so I can assure you that that is not a common occurrence on, at least not on my social media platforms. If it is on those of you who are watching, that's wonderful. Congratulations, but not for me. But this one got a huge amount of attention, and the reason why I think is that the original post that I had read and that I was really moved to share was by a young woman who's an assistant psychologist in the UK. And since this has been kind of graduation season, applying for universities or graduate schools, seasons, entrance exams, and all the rest of it, a lot of people have been posting about the universities they've been accepted to, about the programs they're going to start working on. And her post was so touching and real, because she said that she has not been accepted into a clinical psychology program, and she won't be starting off in graduate school this fall, and that she feels it's just important for that piece of information to be out there, especially on a platform like LinkedIn, right, where we tend to share a lot about successes, a lot about our successes, about successful relationships, about things we've accomplished in the work sphere, and so on. And she received a huge amount of attention for this post. I decided to not only share her post, but to share kind of a small piece of information that I had actually never shared, not on a social media platform before. For those of you who know me, who've been following me for a while, I tend to share very, very little about my personal life. It's a kind of conscious choice that I make. But I shared the fact that a number of years ago, I think over a decade ago, at this point, I had applied to Yale University to do a PhD also in clinical psychology, and I was rejected. And that was it. That was the piece of information that I wanted to share, and it obviously really resonated with people. And so when it comes to making these social comparisons, I think one aspect of it is for us to be mindful of, again, the kind of content that we expose ourselves to, the kind of content that we consume. Again, drawing that parallel with food, to make sure that we really are consuming kind of nutritious content that really feeds us both intellectually and emotionally and relationally as well. But it's really also about thinking about what we share and what are the kinds of information that we share with other people. Are we only sharing those, again, highly curated, highly perfected, highly filtered, successful kinds of highs that we experience in life, which are also important to share? We want to share positivity, which is not quite the same thing as what I just described. Or do we also share some of these moments, the moments where we perhaps stumble a little bit, or we come into a bump on the road and we have to kind of try and figure out how to either go over it or go around it. And I kind of found myself to be guilty of this as well. And it wasn't until I read this post, which is why I was so thankful for it, that I thought about how important it can be, especially during these certain times of the year, when a whole host of young people are engaging in the same kind of experience that's very, binary. It's very, you either succeed or you fail. In those types of moments, how important it can be for those of us who have already gone through a lot of these experiences to share some of these experiences with other people in the virtual world, and to allow people to also socially compare to us in a healthier kind of way, and in a much more balanced, truthful, much more honest kind of a way, and to really show them, but again, especially show the younger people, that there will be times when things don't really go your way and you don't really succeed and you don't really do that well, and things don't really go according to plan, but that's okay. This is another way in which we can compare our life experiences and feel okay that things sometimes don't go that well. So this social comparison one I just found to be really, really important because, like I said, I found myself to be guilty of that as well. There is also, I absolutely focus on sharing a lot of positivity, a lot of resources, a lot of helpful practices, a lot of useful information, a lot of research on my social media platforms. I don't like my own social media platforms to be too much about me in that sense. That's not where my comfort zone is. I'd much rather share about other things. But I did notice that when I share about myself, oftentimes it is about all the high points and all of the successes, and it makes it look as though that's all that there is, which for somebody who's potentially socially comparing to me will really set them up for a very difficult experience. And so just making sure that we're a lot more accurate in terms of how we share our own life with other people. And then for the fifth and final key practice, I wanted to share this phrase with you that may not be new to you, and it's been used a lot over the past few years when talking about digital wellness, disconnect to reconnect. What I mean in this case is really specifically reconnect with your body. And this fifth one, each one of these, as you can tell, was inspired by an experience that I personally had kind of in the digital space in one form or another. But last week, also in celebration of Mental Health Awareness Month, I did an IG Live with a wonderful young woman called Hannah, who hosted me on the 6 Seconds Instagram page. And like I said at the beginning of this live, the 6 Seconds has partnered up with MTV and with a bunch of other really wonderful organizations like Look Up Live, which is a specifically youth-focused organization, in order to really raise a lot more awareness around mental health and emotional well-being. So I would encourage you to check them out. But as Hannah and I were talking, she shared something with me that really kind of stayed with me. And it was this observation that kind of as she and we, but she was talking about her own experience, as she kind of finds herself scrolling through her device, looking at whatever social media platform it is, she had this observation that after a certain amount of time, she kind of loses a sense of herself, or she really loses a sense of her own body. And I thought that was so interesting because what that made me think about, or the image that kind of made to come alive in my mind as she was talking about is this idea of ourselves as these kind of disembodied avatars, losing this sense of our bodies online, because as we're engaging with these platforms, when you think about it, we're not really using our bodies a whole lot. At best, you're kind of doing this. There's a little bit of eye movement, or you're doing this, depending on the platform that you're on. And also, let's be honest, oftentimes there's very little of our brains being used and kind of engaged online as well. In addition to which, there are no kind of, we call these stop signs or boundaries online in the way that we have them in the real world. So there are no actual walls and physical limitations of that kind. There's no sense of daytime or nighttime, right? The online world is always awake. There's always something going on. And so we kind of lose this sense of ourselves and the world around us, because we become kind of fully engaged in this digital space. And while the world around us is kind of moving and changing and transforming, we're kind of sort of frozen in time in this engagement that we have online. And so that was another kind of final point that I wanted to share with you as we slowly wrap this up, is that we need to reconnect with our bodies in a kind of much more frequent, regular habit building way than we do already. And so to take that time every, say, 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes as you're engaging with whatever platform or whatever device that you're engaging in, and just really take a moment to just kind of move your fingers around. I don't know if this happens to you as well, but sometimes I do feel that my fingers start going a little bit numb because of how I'm kind of holding the device and for how long I'm doing it. Move your shoulders around. We tend to carry a lot of tension in our shoulders anyway, but especially when we're on these devices. Stand up, move around, look outside of the window, breathe in really, really deeply. This is another a really interesting research finding from a couple of years back. This phenomenon called screen apnea, or email apnea is perhaps another term by which you know it. And that's the fact that when we are responding to text, but I would imagine the same is true as when we're reading them or when we're anticipating getting them, we actually don't breathe. We stop breathing for certain kind of periods in time, or we just breathe in a very, very shallow way. So we don't breathe properly, and that can cause a lot of issues. If nothing else, it engages our kind of stress response. And so you end up having this release of the stress hormone cortisol when it's really, really not needed, because there is no kind of emergency situation for which that kind of response would be needed. So breathing is a really important aspect of this, of feeling that you are an embodied human being. We're all very much disembodied when we're interacting online, or like I mentioned in one of my previous points, we assume these bodies that are hyper scrutinized online and that are criticized, and that we put this huge amount of effort into changing and augmenting and kind of trying to fit in with whatever the norm is. So that's on a more kind of practical level, to really tune into your body and to really kind of set almost like an inner reminder for yourself to check in with how you're doing in that moment. On a more deeper kind of philosophical level, I know that ever since I was very, very young, anytime I spoke to anybody who was at that point, say older than 30, certainly older than 40, they would always, their feedback on kind of life was always the same, and that was that it goes by too quickly. That before you know it, you turn around and a year has gone by, 5 years have gone by, 10 years have gone by. I think over this past year, we've definitely experienced that kind of relativity of time, in some ways even irrelevance of time. We very rarely spoke about last week or what happened a month ago. Time has gotten really, really kind of messed up, to say the least, over the past year. So we often have this sense of not having any control of the passage of time. I've been hearing that a lot, especially over the past kind of 3 to 5 years. And I do believe that part of the reason is this, that we're so engaged in the virtual life that we're becoming disconnected from the natural changes that happen, again, in the real world. And I think kind of tuning into our body and connecting a little bit more deeply with our body on a more frequent level can really, really help with that. So with that, we're coming up to 45 minutes. Those of you who have watched me before know that I can talk about these topics for a very, very long time. So I want to wrap up for now. I just want to share this one kind of final idea with you of what I believe mental health is, or what I believe mental health should be. I think this is a really helpful way of thinking about it. And I alluded to this at the beginning of this live as well. So mental health is not the complete absence of illness, nor is it the complete presence of happiness. Mental health is the awareness of who you are, the ability to regulate and balance your emotions, and the knowledge that you cannot achieve this state of health without the help of human beings. And I really like this definition. It's a definition that I kind of created myself based on all of the experiences that I've had in the fields of psychotherapy and of coaching over the past kind of decade. Because again, I think it's really important to also understand what it means to be mentally healthy and well, not just what it means to be mentally ill. And Connie, sorry, I just saw your comment right now. I wasn't able to see it before because I had my slides covering it. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you are that you're here, that you're watching this live. If we have any other parents watching us right now, I'd really encourage you to check out Connie and some of the work that she does. So again, this is a kind of an idea around mental health that I really wanted to share with you, that I wanted you to walk away with, that I hope can be really helpful to you as you think about the ways in which you can be both kind of emotionally and and digitally well as well. If you have any questions about anything that I've shared, I really encourage you to reach out, to send me an email. If there's anything else that I can help you with in terms of sharing more resources with you, I would love to do that. Like I said towards the beginning, my website is topcoaching.com. If you would like to get a little bit more information about my work and some additional resources and book recommendations for parents and for non-parents. If you're a teen or a young adult having watched this, I would really love to get your feedback in particular about this, because I really do think that you are the generation that is most affected by this right now, and that is going to be most affected by this in the future, by our digital spaces and what they look like. And it's going to be so important to really empower you to be able to interact with these digital spaces in the healthiest way possible, so that you can really maintain your mental health and just live up to your fullest potential, which is really all that we want for you, us as adults. So thank you all so much again for joining me live, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. Thank you.